Hi to your Patreon. Shout out to RJ Gibson. Welcome to the Howlers. Hi, editing Alex here. I spilled water on my shirt before filming this video, so there's a very noticeable water stain on my shirt the entire time. So that's nice. Alright, so today I wanted to discuss with you all a little bit about my personal way that I go about reviewing and rating a book, as well as shutting down some of the discussion that I see about Goodreads ratings, because to me, so let me get that part out of the way first. So if you follow me on Goodreads, you'll see that I throw a star on a book and I leave a review every time that I read one. For me, don't put a lot of stock into the actual stars that I put in a Goodreads review, because for me, it doesn't mean shit. I basically follow exactly what Goodreads says, where a 2-star means that a book was okay, a 5-star means that I loved it. So keep that in mind if you follow me on Goodreads, that if you rated something higher than me, and I maybe rated it a 3, I probably liked it a lot. And that's about all you need to take into account for that. For example, I hold here 2 Dresden File books, Stormfront and Summer Night, Book 1 and Book 4, right? Yes, moving on. So, when I started Dresden Files, I absolutely adored Stormfront. Technically speaking, it's not as good of a book as Summer Night. But if you were to look at my Goodreads, you would think I'm a crazy person because I have Stormfront as a 5-star, and I have Summer Night as a 3-star. All that means is that I enjoyed Summer Night a lot. It wasn't my favorite Dresden File book, and it's still a very good book. Stormfront I have as a 5 because I loved it. See where I'm going with this? Now, maybe in the grand scheme of something like the Dresden Files, Stormfront is not technically better. It's not written as well as some of the other ones. Grave Peril is still my favorite 4 books in. As an example, that's also a 5-star. But for me, a lot of rating a book or my overall feelings towards it comes from just a personal enjoyment of the book. So I'm kind of going to get into that with a few other books here, and then get into really what my sort of, I guess, review style is, and then kind of what I'm going to do moving forward on the channel. So keep in mind, right now on the channel, I'm never going to give a number rating or a star rating or a percentage rating, because I don't feel like there's a lot of value in that. Because some people may look at a number and think that I hated it, or look at something like the next book that I'm going to talk about and think, well, that can't possibly be right. What do you mean? That's a 5-star book. Bear with me. Way of Kings. I've gotten a lot of shit for giving this a 4-star on Goodreads. Jokingly most of the time, but people were like, well, how can that possibly be a 4-star and not a 5-star? Everything in Stormlight is perfect. 1, it's not. 2, I gave Words of Radiance and Oathbringer a 5 as an example. See what my problem with star ratings here? Because I absolutely love those. Way of Kings for me took a good 40% of me to actually enjoy it. And then I ended up really liking it. But I can't, in good conscience, for me, give it the highest rating on a website, because I didn't like it that much for the first almost half of the book. So that obviously takes it down. And something that I do too is, if I don't necessarily love the first book in a series, like Red Rising, for example, I really didn't like book 1. I almost DNF'd it multiple times. And then as I continued the series, I thought back on book 1 and I said, okay, I see why these things were the way that they were. And I had a better feeling about book 1 looking back at it. So then I could go back and bring up a rating. But again, I overall liked that book. I love the sequels. They make me feel better about the first book, but it as its own, it's okay. This is basically a long-winded way of saying, if you see a star rating on something that I give on Goodreads, just take it at face value. Unless it's like a 1-star, that means I really didn't like the book at all. Something like Secret History, I don't like whatsoever. But something like Ender's Game or Elantris, for example, these were 2 stars for me, and that is simply because it was okay. That doesn't mean I hate the book. Yes, I like to shit on it in Discord because it's funny, but they're okay. And something as an example, and I promise this is the last one, is Dune and Rage of Dragons. These are both incredible books for me. They are awesome in just about every way. I love them both. And they are entirely different books. So what I'm going to get into here in a second and explain kind of my mindset when I go into these books is these are incredibly different books. One's sci-fi, one's fantasy, one is very action heavy, one is barely any action in it, one is more philosophical, one is basically just a revenge tale. I love them both. So let me get into a little bit how I approach these when I read them and just kind of explain my thoughts a little bit. Okay, so first and foremost, characters are the most important part of a book, in my opinion, especially when you're doing dealing with fantasy and sci-fi, maybe horror. I haven't read too much of it, but fantasy and sci-fi for me, the characters make or break a book. If I don't give a shit about the characters, I'm not gonna like the book. Mistborn Era 2 comes to mind. I don't really like Wax or Wayne, and following them for 3 books didn't do it for me. I much prefer the characters in Era 1 because I immediately attached to Vin and Kelsier, and they're kind of like band of side characters that join them. Breeze, Sazed, the entire crew, essentially. They were just more interesting to me. So right off the bat, characters right up front make or break the book. Something like Rage of Dragons. I actually like Tao. Tao is an idiot and does a lot of stupid shit because he's angry, rightfully so. But that doesn't make me not like him. Yeah, he makes mistakes and he does a lot of dumb things in the book, but I am there to ride with him, and I feel that hate and vengeance inside of him, that injustice that's done to him, I feel that with him, and so I'm on board with everything that he does, basically. Something like the Stormlight Archive. Dalinar, Kaladin, and Shallan are probably 3 of my favorite characters that I've read all year. And that really makes that story something to care about, because my next point is going to be the overall actual story and plot of a book. But without those characters, plot and story doesn't really mean much. Like, you need to care about the characters, otherwise you're going to put the book down. As an example, I didn't really like Ender's Game that much. It was just okay for me. Most of that stemmed from I didn't like the characters. I didn't like Ender Wiggin. I thought he was a boring protagonist. He was too good at everything, and generally just wasn't... I didn't see really any redeeming things about him to, care about him. And more so than that, everybody else in the book. Like, yeah, the book is very focused on Ender. Who else matters in the books? Like, none of the other characters get really enough time to be built up. I didn't care about Valentine or his brother, whose name I can't even remember right now. But just them, to me, if I don't care about you, the story doesn't even matter. Like, the rest of it's kind of cool. There's some interesting sci-fi aspects. There's somewhat of an interesting story, but I don't care about Ender at all. And maybe that's just a me thing, but that completely takes me out of the book. Elantris, great example. I don't love everything that Sanderson has written. If you can't tell that about me yet, Raoden and Serene and Hrathen, like, I didn't care about any of these characters. So characters are super, super duper important. And this is probably why, obviously the writing style and things are there too, but great characters really leave an impact on you. Characters are the main focus of any review that I do, and kind of the main draw for me whether or not I'm going to enjoy the book. Like I said, the second part of kind of what I'm thinking about is the story and plot. Now, this may sound a little bit like I'm contradicting myself, because if the characters are phenomenal, story and plot don't really matter as much, but I still need it to be there. Now, the story and plot, while it takes a backseat to the characters, it is still very important. So, like Mistborn Era 1 for me, I'll compare it to Era 2. So Mistborn Era 1, you're following Vin and Kelsier and Elend and everybody else to overthrow the Lord Ruler, who has basically dominated Scadrial for 1,000 years. He's a massive dickhead. He kills people a lot. He is a terrible tyrant to live under. And the entire first plot of the book is to overthrow him. And basically, like, the scope and the stakes are a lot higher. Era 2, You have Wax kind of doing a cop and robber type thing in a Western setting. The story there was just a very much a rehash of a traditional Western story, just with a Mistborn overlay, and that to me was just not very interesting. And then, I mean, already it was not great because I didn't like the characters, but then the story wasn't that interesting either, so it was just like, okay, like, I'm not really gonna care about it. Um, Something like Book of the Ancestor by Mark Lawrence. Nona Gray is a fantastic character to follow, and the entire covenant that she joins, all of those assassin nuns are super cool and interesting, and the overall story, again, there is really interesting as well. I do need to finish Holy Sister. I'm getting to that in December. But story and plot, like, for me, I'm not necessarily a plot-driven person. It's definitely characters first, but I do need some kind of plot moving me forward to keep me engaged in the book. So let's step into the pacing of a book. So again, perfect example here, Way of Kings. I did not like the pacing of the first book at all. Like I said, it took me forever to get into it because I felt like, so I'm kind of used to the whole slow buildup of a fantasy world at this point of a book one, but I felt like it took too long to get anything going, and I felt like there was a lot of repetition at the beginning. So for me, the pacing just wasn't quite there because it felt too slow, and it wasn't moving enough forward for me to get engaged with it. I had a similar issue with Malice by John Gwynne, which I really enjoy as well. And then the second book kind of builds on the foundation that was built in book one, and the pacing kind of fixed itself. Whereas Malice was doing the same, introductions to everything. Here's a bunch of characters. Here's all the different factions, at stake. Here's all the background. Here's the lore. So for me, it felt a little choppy, and it was like, okay, at a certain point, I was like, all right, let's get going. And then Valor, of course, hit the ground running and was a much better paced book. The story felt more streamlined, not simplistic, but streamlined in the sense of like, okay, we have a goal that we're going towards, whereas Malice is just kind of setting up all this stuff. Way of Kings was setting up all this stuff, like here's Kaladin and his backstory, here's Dalinar, here's Shallan, and it was kind of choppy to me. And then all the interludes, and I just wasn't used to the way that the book was set up. So pacing for me is a big thing because Wheel of Time, in my opinion, suffers from this as well. I know I'm kind of bouncing around in books, but thoughts are just coming to me. Wheel of Time has incredibly high highs and pretty low lows. Now, not everybody's going to feel that. A lot of people love the very slow burn, soak in all the details, think about the lore and the history and the world around you. For me, sometimes I really just want to get back to the plot. So, like, if something insanely awesome just happened, and then I have 200 pages of nothing really going on and people just talking, you might pull me out of the book. So that's where pacing, you kind of need to strike a chord and some balance there, which finally brings me to world building. So world building, of course, depending on the style of book, you need it more than others. So something like The Wheel of Time, where you are creating an entire world and culture and religion and everything that goes into it, the world building there is likely a 10 out of 10 for most people, myself included, simply because the extent that Robert Jordan went to create the world is truly astonishing. Something like Tolkien with Lord of the Rings, like the world building is just fantastic. It's hard to discredit anything about it because they went through all this painstaking detail to actually create a living world with cultures and people that you feel like actually live in this place. Something like the Dresden Files, at least at the start, doesn't really need that. You're in urban Chicago. Everybody knows what Chicago is like. And then you add those fantasy elements into it. You don't need a ton of detail and world building to tell people what Chicago looks like. A book that I felt like could have used more world building and more explanation and more depth was Ender's Game. That was one of my main complaints about it, was I just felt like I don't really know much about this society and this world and like why these things are set up the way they are. Why are these, children geniuses to begin with? Why do they need to be the ones that are brought up into the military? So like for me, you need to, again, strike a balance here, right? Okay, so that was basically a rambling way of saying that's how I currently look at books. And as you can see, it's not very structured. So moving forward, what I think I'm going to do is I'm still not going to do any kind of number rating or anything, because like I said, I don't think that really gives a whole lot of value, even if I explain like what my numbers mean. But in general, for a structured review moving forward, I think I'm going to go over the fuck was that? I'm going to go over the story and the plot, followed by the characters, whether I like them or not, what makes them good or bad, who they are, why they're interesting, things like that. The pacing, because pacing is very important, as I've said. And then followed by the world building and atmosphere of the book. So those will be the main 4 points that I actually focus on, and the structure of the review moving forward. Now, of course, my general overall feeling towards it, positive or not, is going to impact obviously how I feel about those aspects of the book. But in general, for me, as far as like if it comes to a recommendation or do I want other people to read the book, it's almost always going to be yes. I have yet to read a book that I'm just like, nobody should ever read this book ever. It's terrible. Like, burn it. Because you might like it. If I don't like it, you might. So definitely keep that in mind when you watch any of these videos. So hopefully that makes a little bit of sense. It wasn't too rambly. But that's where I'm at right now. That's where I'm going moving forward. But as always, like and subscribe if you do enjoy the content. Hit up the Patreon if you want to support the channel. It's always optional, but always appreciated. Join the Discord if you want to keep the conversation going. And feel free to leave a comment down below. Let me know if what I'm thinking about doing with the reviews makes sense, if that's a good structure or not. Let me know your thoughts. But until next time, everybody, keep reading.